Welcome back, everyone. Now, in this segment, we're going to ask the following question. What do we know for sure about the IVC based on what we found while digging in the dirt? We'll only be looking at a few details in this video. You can literally spend your whole life studying the IVC. And before we watch this segment, I just want to make sure that we've all watched this clip called Omer's Travels, which is a beautiful HD video of a trip through Mohenjo-daro. Once we've seen it, then let's get started. What we're going to do is look at 4 different things in this clip. 1, the geography of the Indus Valley civilization. 2, the planning and architecture of the major Indus cities. 3, the kind of artifacts and goods that we can find in the IVC. And 4, the seals and other kind of forms of writing that the Indus civilization has left for us. So let's start with some geography. As you might expect, the Indus Valley civilization is mainly found in the valley of the Indus River, which today runs through Pakistan and empties into the Arabian Sea. This river valley you can actually think of as being separated into 2 distinct culture zones. The Punjab, which is in the north, and it's fed by 5 major rivers, and then the Sindh, which is in the south, and which is more of a kind of arid and windswept landscape, except for those areas that are fed by the Indus itself. Harappa is in the Punjab, Mohenjo-daro is in the Sindh, and so you can imagine that life was kind of different in both of these places, even though the cities themselves look alike. Imagine the lifestyle differences between, say, Toronto and Vancouver, even though the buildings might kind of look alike in both, right? There were 2 other river zones besides the Indus that formed part of the IVC. The first was called the Saraswati River, it was once a large flowing river, but now is just a dry riverbed that's called the Hakra and Ghaggar rivers. 2 major IVC cities are located on this riverbed, Ganweriwala and Rakhigadi. Another zone lies further to the southeast in the state of Gujarat, along the Sabarmati River and also on the coastline. The large site of Dholavira has been found there, and also a number of important coastal sites like Lothal and so on. These agricultural zones were, of course, crucial to the life of the IVC, since that was the only way that the cities could feed their large populations, was by getting resources from these areas. Now let's talk about the history of the IVC, which we can think of as falling into 3 broad phases or periods. These are called the early, the mature, and the late. Right? The pre-urban or early period of IVC culture ranged for a tremendously long time, from about 7,000 BC all the way up to 2500 BC. The earliest finds are in the area of Mehergarh, which is in the far western part of today's Pakistan, known as Baluchistan, and also in neighboring areas of what's today Afghanistan. The people mostly seem to have been subsistence farmers or herdsmen, hunter-gatherers, and at the start it was what's called an aceramic culture, meaning that they didn't have pottery. The village architecture and planning also seems kind of rudimentary, and mostly the finds there are stone and bone tools, what's known as the Neolithic or New Stone Age. In later phases, starting around 3000 BC, these cultures began to produce more Harappan, classic Harappan style pottery that you can see examples of, which feel like precursors to the explosion of arts and crafts that's going to happen in the IVC cities in the 3rd millennium. Their beads, pottery, ornaments, even those female figurines that are found throughout the IVC, like the typical trademarks of the IVC. Now, this wasn't yet the mature phase of IVC culture, but maybe we can call it like the teenager phase. I don't know. The 100 years between 2600 to 2500 BC seem like they were kind of a momentous time in Indian history. It feels like all of a sudden things started kind of ramping up, and the entire region committed itself, it feels like, to a new way of life. Right? The old ways of subsistence farming was kind of abandoned, there was investment in large-scale urban projects. By 2500 BC, the IVC enters into what people call its mature phase. At this time, the IVC started covering a huge swath of land that you can see on the map, over 650,000 square kilometers. That's the size of Texas, to give you an idea of what we're talking about. As a culture, the most striking things about the mature IVC was, of course, that it was an urban, mercantile, and technologized culture. The big cities, Harappa and so on, had populations of about 40,000 each. The whole population of the civilization at its peak is estimated at 5 million. To put that into perspective, in all of Canada before the Europeans came to Canada, the First Nations population is estimated to have been about 500,000. So it was only 1/10 of the size of the IVC. The main thing that pops us at us from the IVC, aside from this urbanism and so on, is the tremendous amount of jewelry and luxury goods that they seem to have had. The heart of the cities appears to have been an industry of bead making and bangle making. The raw materials would come from actually very far away, from the Hindu Kush mountains all the way in the north, from the oceans, from maybe even jade and silk from China, so that although that's kind of controversial. This kind of mobilization of goods for industrial purposes seems to have been unparalleled in the ancient world. It kind of started in the IVC. These goods all wound up at the kind of big jewelry workshops in the 5 of the largest cities of the IVC. These cities were all planned cities. They were built on man-made raised platforms, and they seemingly developed over a very short period of time. In about 80 or 100 years during that teenager period we were talking about, so the 2600 to 2500 BC. Now, what did those cities look like? Now, let's take a look at 2 of the big ones, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Mohenjo-daro was on the banks of the Indus and the Sindh, like I said, in the south. Harappa is on the banks of the Ravi River, one of the 5 rivers of the Punjab that come together in the north. 550 kilometers separate these 2 cities, but still they have a remarkably similar street plan and common architectural features. These similarities are so great that it seems that both cities emerged from the same kind of design principles. So let's take a closer look and see what I'm talking about here. Maybe what's so amazing about the IVC is how well regulated their urban architecture was, considering how long ago it took place. Across different cities in the Indus Valley, structures were made using bricks that were highly standardized. They're all the same size and shape. The citadel of these cities, the upper town area, was built on a massive raised platform, and it was walled in. This walling in may have been for protection, of course, but then maybe not, because the walls don't seem to have fortifications. There's no way to defend the walls. Instead, maybe the walls were there to control who can go in and who can go out, right? Especially if you think about it, if there are valuable goods and materials inside the walls. In the lower city, the major streets were carefully planned in a grid, even in smaller IVC towns. This is really unusual for so long ago, right? The main thoroughfares went east and west. The crossroads were north and south, all over the place, right? In all of the cities. In these cities blocks, tiny lanes would then go off into the individual houses and workshop areas. The houses seem to have been all sort of 2-story buildings with interior courtyards and very few, if any, windows that were facing the street. Each of the houses, at least among the seemingly well-off classes, had their own wells, kitchens, and, believe it or not, toilets. So water management was probably the most incredible thing about this ancient society. Not only were there wells in most of the homes, personal wells, there was a very sophisticated citywide public covered drainage system that went along the side of the roads, connected to all of the toilets in all of the houses. In Mohenjo-daro, every street has a sewage channel, which were covered in limestones. That's sometimes hard to find, actually, even in modern India today. covered sewage system. In citadel areas, as I mentioned, there were large-scale public buildings, including a stunning structure that John Marshall had called the Great Bath in Mohenjo-daro. We don't really know what it's for. It could have been for ritual purposes, maybe for general public use. We can find these kinds of step wells actually all across Gujarat and Rajasthan even today when water is scarce. So maybe a continuity there. There were also large warehouses in the citadel area. Marshall and Wheeler thought these were granaries used to kind of hoard food supply, right? But no grain particles have actually been found in these buildings, so maybe they were used to store goods. Who knows? Near the structures, there's also smaller residences and assembly halls that could have been maybe military structures. Another set of quarters that Marshall had called a college for priests that was located near the Great Bath. In the lower city, there are numerous clustered areas which were clearly artisanal workshops or studios where most of the jewelry is found. The layout suggests a kind of robust engagement in some kind of state-level authorities in the citadel and trade companies or guilds that were scattered around the town. And this could have been the reason why these cities were so successful, was this kind of planning of the city. So that's what the cities were like. Let's take a little break here, and then we'll come back and talk about the artifacts that have been found in the Indus Valley civilization.